Io sono Francesco, sono uno studente di relazioni internazionali e i documentari sono uno dei miei interessi, ma non ho ancora esperienza professionale nell'ambito.
Great.
Ok.
Thank you. Yes.
Allora, io sono Tony, sono uno studente di lettere e ho qualche esperienza come sceneggiatore di piccoli progetti indipendenti, e sono anche in Sinapsi
Uh-huh.
e niente, progetto.
Ciao, io sono Fabio, faccio parte di INUIT, l'associazione che promuove questo evento, per quanto non ci siamo ancora presentati purtroppo. Sono, diciamo, la voce fuori dal coro perché sono quello con meno esperienza in campo appunto cinematografico, comunque produzione video, e quindi diciamo che sono la persona che vuole più imparare da questo progetto rispetto agli altri che comunque sono affermati nel campo.
Okay.
Sono Matteo, sono il presidente dell'associazione INUIT e ci occupiamo di video partecipativo con minoranze e quindi siamo molto interessati a approfondire l'argomento. Faccio anche il graphic designer diciamo, per arrotondare, però mi interessa anche approfondire il settore del video, del documentario in particolare.
Okay. Fantastic.
Grazie. Rosanna Santoro, lavoro in una cooperativa sociale. Io sono una counselor nello specifico, però noi ci occupiamo di minori a rischio, famiglie in difficoltà e lavoriamo spesso con il documentario, il video, insomma questo mezzo per poter poi coinvolgere le famiglie e i minori. E mi interessa particolarmente il lavoro sulle storie di vita come mezzo per...
What was the last thing? Okay, I heard.
Ok.
Great. Very interesting.
Io sono Gino, non faccio parte del congresso, sono la guardia del corpo delle due signore, di cui il marito di una. Grazie.
Hi, my name is Angela. I'm an architecture student, and I did a lot of projects of urban involvement, and I'm trying to see if I can get some tools to explain my project, what I did with this kind of project. Yeah.
With the view of doing more?
Urban involvement, yes, about the city, some place where you can work to do socialization between people and the urban space. This is
Okay.
okay. Thank you.
Io sono Lucrezia e lavoro presso l'Università di Bari, ho realizzato qualche video promozionale della nostra università e comunque dell'utilizzo del video nell'educazione, nella formazione. Faccio montaggio, ripresa, insomma.
Okay. Thank you.
Ciao, io sono Monica, sono un'antropologa, studio anche museografia e beni culturali. Sono anche una fotografa e giornalista freelance. Non ho ancora mai lavorato con il video, però mi interesserebbe.
Okay. Fantastic.
Di nuovo?
Yeah, for everyone else.
Mi chiamo Luca e studio le scienze della formazione all'Università di Foggia. Non ho mai lavorato con i video, a parte avere un canale su YouTube di cose mie particolari, video che faccio con gli amici.
Oh, but that's interesting. So you have your own YouTube channel?
Don't understand. Sì,
that's-
con i miei pensieri
Yeah,
e
okay,
cioè, quello che penso lo recito, lo monto e faccio recitare gli amici o me stesso, dipende.
Okay.
Ok.
Cool.
Io sono Miria e sono un direttore della fotografia, ho una piccola casa di produzione cinematografica con cui abbiamo prodotto un film di fiction e invece l'ultimo progetto è stato un documentario sugli ultimi partigiani esistenti.
E adesso stiamo per produrre un documentario in una scuola di Taranto, in una scuola elementare di Taranto, sì. Sì.
Io sono Antonio e sono l'autista privato di Miria. No, no vabbè, sono laureato in lettere, una tesi in storia del cinema italiano e poi sintetizzare, diciamo, non saprei dire che cosa sono, cioè cosa faccio esattamente.
Okay.
Scopriremo.
Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. Sorry it's taken us a little bit of time to get prepared this morning, but as you see, there's lots of different technical requirements that were needed. I can't remember anyone's name, so I'm sorry, but over the course of the next 2 days, I'm sure we'll find out. I'm going to go back here to sort out our nice slideshows that we put together. So we're much better filmmakers than we are slideshow makers. So hopefully you'll excuse that. Okay, well, we'll start with introducing ourselves. We're one half of an organisation called Postcode Films, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. I thought by telling you a bit about myself first, and then Ed will do the same. So I'm British, French, Iranian. That's my kind of background. So I like to think there's an interesting cinematography background in that as well. I grew up in France, where I studied philosophy and literature, and then moved to the UK where I studied more literature. And a couple of years after I graduated, became really interested in the visual side of things, and that's where I studied visual anthropology and met Ed. And that's why it's really nice to see 4 anthropologists here. You'll notice that we speak about anthropology a lot because it's really informed the way that we think about film and we think about participatory film particularly. The very first project that I worked on was a participatory photography project called New Londoners, which you can see up here. And it was working with newly arrived young refugees who were separated from their families in the UK. And I'll speak a bit more about that later because it's a kind of ongoing theme and really informed my understanding of working with people with visual mediums. So since then, I basically have 3 strands to my work. I'm a producer of creative documentaries mainly, and also a photography project. So I think and these are 3 of the projects that I've worked on in the past 2 years, I guess. The Runner, which is a feature-length film about a long-distance runner from the Western Sahara, which is the last colony in Africa, something that most people don't know about. This is a book, it's a photography book called The Grey Line. It's about soldiers from the US and the UK who've spoken out against the war in Iraq. It was named as one of Time's best photo books of the year yesterday, which is very exciting. And then The Reluctant Revolutionary, which is another feature documentary about Change Square in Yemen, so the place in Yemen where the protest movement started and developed 2 years ago. So you probably see there's quite a strong human rights thread to the work that I produce. And that's what I'm the most passionate about. Apart from my producing, I also am the program manager of a festival. So I select the films for Bird's Eye View, which is at the end. Bird's Eye View is a UK-based festival that celebrates the work of female directors. So with the view that there aren't enough women on screen with speaking parts or equal parts to men or anything relevant to say. That's the kind of thing that we want to draw attention to and challenge. So we celebrate women directors in all the different forms of films that they might make. And then obviously I work with Postcode Films, but we'll tell you a bit more about that after Ed's introduced himself. So I've chosen the pictures for Ed's for Ed's slides, so
Yeah.
they're a bit less. They make a bit less sense.
So don't blame me. Hello, I'm Ed. I started by studying Italian and Spanish literature at university, so I can speak a bit of Italian, what's left in my head, and comes back after a while, so hopefully we can talk a bit. But then I changed halfway through my degree to social anthropology, which is what I graduated in. After graduating, this is a suitcase, but it's meant to be a briefcase like a bureaucrat would have. My graduate job was working for the government as a policy advisor, because I knew I wanted to do something with a social impact. When I got there, it was like being hit over the head repeatedly with lots of horrible bureaucracy and details, and feeling very disassociated from what you were actually working on. I was working on criminal justice policy, and it felt like I was being asked to make decisions about people and things that I didn't really know anything about. You were discouraged from meeting people. So I think that's where a desire to do something that was more collaborative and grassroots took hold, as well as not having to wear a suit or go into work. So I quit quite soon after starting, and went and did a master's in visual anthropology, which is the code for the master's in visual anthropology is MAVIS, and a common name for old women in England is Mavis. So that's why she's there.
It's an example of Ed's humour. You're going to see some of it.
So then, as Elhum said, that's where postcode films, although we didn't know it, was formed. 3 out of the 4 of us who run postcode films met on the master's course, and we still collaborate with other people from that network, and we still are involved with the department. It's at Goldsmiths University in London, the Centre for Visual Anthropology. Very good course. And then what else is here? So then, after I left, I decided I wanted to work in participative filmmaking. I did a lot of research in that during my master's. I didn't want to go and work in broadcast TV. I also wanted to make my own films, though. So I've been working as an independent filmmaker, as well as running all these workshops that we do together since then. I do a lot of films for international NGOs, as well as a lot of domestic work on education, as in the UK. I've done a few things for TV, one of which was some short portraits, which are semi-ethnographic, of what it's like to live and work on a rig in the North Sea, an oil rig. So they were for British TV. And the map of India is because I've spent a lot of time working in India. The film I did for my master's in visual anthropology was set in India and was about a grassroots tea trading cooperative. But I wrote in connection with that, I wrote about whether anthropologists should be advocates for the causes that they write or make films about, and I'm interested in that interface about how engaged anthropologists should be. And a lot of people say they should remain neutral. I think I argue the opposite. Anyway, so I made that film, and then this is linked because for what I thought was going to be a 1-year project and has now been going on for 4 years, I've been making a feature-length documentary, filming and directing it in Calcutta, about the oldest auction house in India, and the 2 brothers who run it. It's their family business, and they're trying to save it. And I'm very happy to show you a trailer and all that sort of thing at some point, but it's, I guess, less relevant to what we're talking about. But again, I think the reason I was interested in making that film is because I got the opportunity to work very closely with the 2 brothers, and I've tried to direct it in such a way that it's quite a collaborative process, as well as wanting to make a film that wasn't about all the other stuff you see about India, which tends to either be about the economic miracle or abject poverty. So I'm interested in more nuanced stories that we can use film to tell. So, yeah, that's that.
So both of us are part of Postcode Films. Oh, can I just check? So all the translation, everything is all good? You're all following? Yeah? Okay, great. So Postcode Films, we created this collective to work together in about 2007. And the idea was to create and facilitate documentary films that explored the idea of place and identity. So, and it really came from, this idea really came from working on one project which was very specific in time and place, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, but the first project, which we will go into more detail about, involved working with groups of young people to make films about postcodes that were next to them in London. A postcode, if you don't know, is like a zip code. So it's the area, it defines an area. And we were very aware that in places like London, or any city really, you have these communities who live very near to you that you know nothing about. So we translated the idea of anthropology in terms of investigating another community to a very localized level. So rather than going off to the very traditional sense of anthropology, living with a tribe, they would go and actually spend time with a community that were just down the street with them and get to know about them. So that's where the name came from.
So I'm going to show you a series of maps. This was a project carried out by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is a UK-based think tank foundation. And this idea very much informs why we came to work with film around specific communities and young people. So these maps were drawn by all different aged young people. So this is a young female from Yorkshire, which is in the north of England, and who's 15. And so they mapped their local area, and they, in different colours, showed which parts of their local area they felt safe in, where different people spend time in. So for example, here you see the red bit is the no-go area, it's unsafe. The green bits are okay. Then there are different people who are kind of grouped in different places. So chavs, not a lot. Like chavs, I don't go there very much. Chavs, don't go there very much. This says chavs, goths, emos, Asians, all Asians. So all of this bit is orange, so it's not as safe. So this idea of mapping the local area is really interesting, and the fact that a young person aged 15 feels so unsafe to spend time in somewhere that's central to her local area was really interesting, but also quite sad. So this is another example. This is a much younger young person, 11-year-old male from Glasgow. So you can see these are two different streets close to his house, and he's separated them out into safe and don't go. So on one side of the street he feels he's safe, and the other side he feels he's not able to go. This side is safe because you see his family is there. This side we don't know what it is. He's circled, for example, the graveyard. So he's separated out spaces that he felt weren't safe for him to go, or weren't, he couldn't define them as his own, despite the fact that they're actually so close to his house. This is an 18-year-old male in Tower Hamlets. The way that
Tower Hamlets is a very deprived borough of London. I think the most deprived. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, and Tower Hamlets has big extremes. I think there are quite a lot of boroughs, there are quite a lot of areas in London that have very big extremes, where very rich people will be sitting next to very poor people. And Tower Hamlets is one of those areas where a lot of people have been buying housing because it's more affordable, and so pushing out the people who traditionally grew up and lived in Tower Hamlets. So it's an area where there's a lot of conflicts in that sense. There's a lot of inequality. What's also interesting, upsetting about Tower Hamlets is that it's one of the key areas of where something called the postcode wars is happening in London. So this is also something that was developing as we set up postcode films, is that there's this this kind of war amongst young people from different postcodes. So you can't, as a young person, go into a postcode that's not your own, or you're presenting a challenge to the young people in that postcode. And this was something that was, well, it was a lot bigger in 2007. I think it still persists as a problem, but it's something that exists definitely amongst young people in London. And
they will actively define themselves by this code. Is there something similar here? Like,
you mentioned something.
Dipende da dove vieni, in alcune città funziona così, dall'area, soprattutto Bari anche, se vieni dalla zona di San Pasquale magari è una zona un pochettino più elevata rispetto agli Apigia. Voi siete di Bari, quindi conoscete meglio. Io vengo da un paesino che si chiama Copertino e quindi anche lì esistono queste differenze di quartieri. Se vieni da un quartiere sei definito tradizionalmente come proveniente da una famiglia più povera o più agiata, quindi esiste sicuramente anche in Italia, soprattutto nelle grandi città, ma anche nei piccoli centri. It's the same as in England or in London, yeah. I think.
So
and I guess everywhere it's not that new news, I guess. It's just for us, postcode was a useful way to define it, and we thought it might be quite powerful to try and call our organisation something that was doing the opposite of these wars that were going on.
So you can kind of see it here, where this is the main street that's the main street in Tower Hamlets, and this is what this young person has called the front line, which is it's terrible. You know, it's terrible that this is being used. It's real, like, war words. And then it's, I can't read it properly, but so all of the crosses are places that you can't go, like there. And then, yeah, so that's like the halal place. So they've separated out where it's permissible to go and not. This is another 18-year-old woman. Again, so she's just separated out scary to go, okay to go. So it was the idea very much of the organisation came from this idea, the idea of mapping the city amongst places that you could and you couldn't go.
And this was a national, these aren't drawings that people we worked with did. This was like a very big organisation doing a national survey of young people's attitudes and how they perceived their local area. So there was clearly a zeitgeist or whatever.
You can see more at this link if you're interested to find out more about this project specifically. But so this idea mapped very well with what we were interested in also, I think, as anthropologists, and we were interested in the fact that media is becoming more and more used. It feels like we're really media saturated. Everyone can make a film, and at the same time there's not much thought necessarily put into how people are being represented in those films, or what content is being put out, where is that content going, what's happening with it. And I suppose it was trying to channel both of these things into something quite useful. So we wanted to facilitate films, so help, for example, these young people to make a film about these issues that they feel they're feeling, but at the same time use film as a way to maybe question the fact that you feel it's scary to go to one area but okay to go to another, and think about how the representations that you will come up with in doing that will inform how other people feel about those areas, and basically to kind of provoke a debate really around these things specifically.
Because when we were setting up, that was really just the explosion of YouTube. It was all starting to have an online video and that sort of thing to be widely used. Obviously now it's very, very common.
So maybe Ed will tell us briefly about the various different things that Postcode Films does as an organisation, and then we'll go into looking at one example more in depth and specifically?
Yeah, so that's kind of always this idea of location and identity always is our, I don't know, mission statement, but it's the projects we get involved with tend to be because people have seen that mission statement and they ask us to collaborate with them, but obviously we can be flexible. The 3 areas of work we do, as it says on our website, are to design and deliver these participative workshops with young people, students, community groups, where we work with them quite intensively. It can be, we have done them very briefly over sort of 2 or 3 days, sometimes they're over a few months. Obviously it just depends on resources, but the idea is to combine practical training with some of this theoretical stuff, which we think visual anthropology brings, thinking about the responsibility of representation. So the process is as important as the product in these workshops we run, which I think is a bit different to some of the other workshops that exist out there. The second sort of strand, which myself and someone else who's not here mainly run, is using film for research, which I'll talk about in more depth this afternoon as a kind of case study. It seems to be a growing area, but basically using ethnographic film for public and third sector organisations so that they can perhaps do something a bit more qualitative, a bit more embedded, a bit more grassroots, giving a voice to the people they're researching. And then thirdly, and then also, I mean, there's a sort of side tangent to that, which is a collaboration with academics, which I'll probably talk about tomorrow. So people within universities, institutional partnerships. So one side is with research organisations, one side is with universities. And then the third main strand is actually making films to commission, which I apologise, it's on our to-do list. The bit on the website is still pretty bad and doesn't represent what we do. But we work with all sorts of organisations, mainly things like theatres, museums, heritage organisations, that sort of thing. So we did something on Punch and Judy. I don't know, La Pulcinella. Do you know Pulcinella? In fact, I interviewed 2 Pulcinella practitioners from Naples. Punch, who is Pulcinella's descendant, had their birthday last year. So there was a big celebration in England. But anyway, that's sort of a side thing and it is less participatory. We just do it because it's fun. And all this sort of stuff gets into film festivals, and especially with the workshops on the research side and the educational side, we're quite keen that the films have a life for a long while after they've been made, which I think is a refreshing change from maybe working in a broadcast arena. Films can have a life and a long time afterwards and be productive for all sorts of debates and discussions. So now Elhum's going to tell you what's happening in the next 2 days.
Okay, so a brief outline probably. This morning we're going to spend some time really looking at examples quite in depth, examples of projects that we've run and I suppose learning from those projects. And then we're going to use that as a guide to, I suppose, pointers, methodologies, what to think about when you're setting something up yourself. And I mean, you'll see there's a whole kind of arena of things, and I'm sure you know from all your different backgrounds as well. This afternoon we'll look a bit at funding for projects, where you might find funding, how to pitch projects. It's kind of, pitching projects is just absolutely key, whatever you're doing, whether you're producing projects or setting them up or running them, it's always really important to know how to pitch them. So that's what we'll look at a little bit this afternoon. Then we're also going to do a little case study around participatory photography and talk through a project there. Tomorrow morning we'll think, and we're going to get you to do some exercises around that as well. Tomorrow morning we're going to talk a little bit more about research, so what Ed mentioned earlier. And I think there'll be space all along to ask questions and even specific questions on projects that you're working in, or if you want to share examples from your own work. I think it would be really nice to make it as interactive as possible, so do pitch in when, you know, as you just did. I think it really brings something so that we can, you know, share and learn from each other.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're quite a diverse audience, so do let us know if there's something you particularly want to hear about.
Yeah.
Anyone questions so far before we talk about the project? No? Okay.
Yes? No? Okay, great. So the first project that we'll talk about was the first project that we ran. It was called Southeast Ethnography. It was based in the southeast of London, and it was absolutely based on this very idea that we've been talking about of learning to know your neighbourhood, in a sense. It was a partnership project. It was a partnership with the school that we ran it at, with the Royal Anthropological Institute, and also with Media Box, so a kind of film education funding body in the UK. What was really good about the project is we took this anthropological idea. Is it on?
Elhum, can you just put your microphone here?
Okay, is that better? So we took this anthropological idea of. Wait, what? Up here. Okay, good. The anthropological idea of making the strange familiar and the familiar strange. So inviting people to reflect on the areas in their local area that they didn't know anything about and to learn about them. So we worked with a group of young people who were all media students. They were all 15 to 17. They'd never worked with cameras professionally. They'd obviously, as young people, worked with their camera phones or made things themselves, but they'd never thought about film in a more structured way. And the films that they made were all free choice. You know, they chose the film's topics. The only thing we asked them to do is to, well, make something, explore something that they didn't know about. Really to use the camera as a doorway to something that they were intrigued by and wanted to learn more about, but had never thought or dared to, almost. So the 3 films that were made, is it difficult to hear?
Yes, it's difficult to hear you without hearing on the background. I can hear both together. It's difficult.
Okay, so how do we amend that?
You can hide.
Higher my voice. Okay. There's always a problem with the level of my voice, always. So I'm sorry. So the 3 films that were made all reference the local community and the changes in the local community. The first one was called Anglesey Road. It was about the Somali community within Woolwich, which was where we were making the films. The second one was called The Good Old Days, which looked at a traditional English butcher's that was having to close down because of the changes in the local community, which meant that it was no longer a relevant place. And the final film was called Talk of the Trade, and it was about market stalls in the area and how they were losing trade because of the opening of supermarkets. So a lot of interest in traditions and change, and how I suppose movements of populations had really changed the face of the area, and these were things that the young people were trying to figure out, and they used film as a way to understand them and figure them out. So we'll show 2 of the films now. Do you want to add anything before then?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that the reason we are talking about our first project, even though it was 6 years ago, is because, and we'll talk about this after the films are shown, a lot of the methodologies we use are based on the structure we came up with during this project. So whilst the films probably don't look as good as the films we're making these days, because of lots of reasons, but mainly because they were made 6 years ago, try and bear in mind the process that the students might have gone through, which we'll talk about in more detail afterwards.
But having said that, these remain the films that are shown the most often, even now, and that are still talked about even now, all this time ago, in terms of all of the projects that we've ever run. And so it's, and as you say, a lot of the methodologies that we came up with then, but also some of the really key learning, I think, about how to run projects came from running this one. Okay, so I'll start with...
I think the translators are going to do their best. There's English subtitles on the films, and they said they will try. Let's see.
So hopefully this will be an all right viewing
there's
experience.
There's two films. The first one's the Somali one, and the second one's The Butchers. They're both about 5 minutes, I think, 4.5. Should we turn the light off?
Can you turn the light off?
Can we turn the light off, Matteo?
Ah. You can move.
To the Somali community, Anglesey is a place where people gather around because it's a community place.
What's up, man?
What's going on?
Not too bad, man.
Cool.
Yeah?
How you doing, man?
So you know what we say normally, yeah? When we're greeting, we say assalamu alaikum.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
Like I said again, it's a meeting point for the people. A lot of people that are not Somalian, they see this as Somalia Road, basically. A lot of people have called it Somalia Road.
Somali shops there. Most of Somali men are internet cafe. There's internet cafe there. There's like Somali men are always there. It's a normal, like, it's a little restaurant where a coffee shop. Yeah. They sit there and have coffee and eat stuff. So yeah, I think Anglesey is the most like road that there's Somali people.
So shops like these are basically places where the community feels safe. Whatever they're buying is halal, yeah, and it's according to religion. You know, different food, different drinks down here, yeah, different drinks. So one of the summer drinks that we get from from Middle East. As you can tell, they're written in Arabic as well. So Chinese, see? Ah, here you go. You see? So people think Anglesey Road is a very small place, but there's a lot in here, man. You have to understand it. You have to be part of the community to actually know it. So let's go forward. All right, we're just gonna go downstairs. So all of these things are in Anglesey Road. Olders, youngers, whoever's Somalian basically comes on Anglesey Road to chill out and to hang about and just to socialise. It's just a social street, you know. We as Somalians, we like to see each other. We're quite a big family and a big community. It's cultural and religious reasons. That's why we show respect to our elders, and the elders show respect to the youngest, because they're the future, you know. My dad down there, right there's my dad, you see? He looks too young to be my dad, you see? This is Mr. Habib down here. This is my dad. Very difficult. You can imagine, you know, you were happily in your country, everything was going really nice, and then all of a sudden a war broke out. And it was like, just get out. You know, it was a no-win situation. You either died or you moved out.
It's been a cultural shock, I must say, because I came from a nation where community is very strong and people are very hospitable. The weather was completely different from here. It was sunny, warm. And believe me, I came in December, and put it this way, for the first week I was planning to go back.
Yeah, Anglesey Road is now full of Somali people, and the reason is since we moved into this area, I would say, I don't have the exact number, but I would say a few years ago, 10 years, 20 years, 15 years ago, and it wasn't like this.
يعني حق النباتقلية ما قرنيسها ليش اللي بدي هالكن أدو وفي عن تبي يا ولد جاي دلوقتي كده عادي ده قلبك يشري لكن هذا اللي هالكن نبقى كويس أنا إنك سو هذا بروبلم نجاه يستو تذكير يراء أو ماشي تشوفي دباتوين بدنا نجاه يستو نوبة عنا يوح كبد الهديد دولد ما نجاه عاوني سوا.
It was my mum. She didn't know English, so it was really hard for her to like get used to it. I mean, she'd always have to take someone with her to go and translate and stuff like that.
There, basically, as you can see, some of our parents don't speak English very well. And basically, young people don't have the support. They need the support to actually help them out to be in the right path. So that's where people like me come down.
When I came, I was about 3 years old, but my mum came here with us when we was very young. And I've got 4 other siblings, so it was hard for her bringing them by herself.
To me, I feel it is good for us to integrate others and to move into London or other parts of the country.
I see myself as Somalian and British because I've been here most of my life and like 2 cultures. I've got like 2 cultures to I can that's an advantage you see because like I'm Somalian and I am British, so it's 2 advantages I see that as.
It's like Somalia's come to Southeast London.
I hope you learn a bit of our culture and our vibe and everything else, and I hope this will actually get you to see another side of our community, and I bid you farewell. Thank you very much. Peace. Assalamu alaikum.
We've used Kennedy's, well, all our life really. My children don't know any different. Nobody really likes anything else other than Kennedy's, and it's just a tragic feeling that they're closing down.
That's 90 feet, young man.
Bill has been Kennedy's all his life really, since he was he was 15 or 16 when he first started here. And I was only a young mum, so really it's never been any different. I mean, I've moved out now, but I still come here to Kennedy's.
Oh, nice Christmas present for me, isn't it?
So you're putting up decorations?
Yeah. Sausages. Yeah, 100%.
100%.
Yeah, 100%. Guarantee you.
No one's had no complaints.
Never in a million years, never. No, truthfully. 9 times out of 10, it's sausages they come in for.
I've never ate any other sausages other than Kennedy's.
What do you come here for?
Well, I always buy sausages. For sausages.
Sausages, aren't
They're sausages.
Really, but my absolute favourite is their beef sausages.
Well, I buy the sausages. The sausages.
Usually the pork pies.
I always come in Kennedy's to get my sausages because they're the best ones.
You talk to anyone in South London, this part of the water they eat these and no one else's, truthfully.
Kennedy's has been here for years. I mean, I'm 60 years of age now, and I've known Kennedy's since a child. My mum and dad used to come here for all their sausages and pies and so on and so forth. It's just part of the local area. It's part of the history of the local area. So it'll be a sad day when it goes. A lot of local people, a lot of older people than me as well, rely on places like this. To get all their provisions for the week. They can't, supermarkets are okay, but they don't sell sausages like this.
There's one gentleman that comes regular. He's actually bought extra chest freezer to put all the extra sausages and pies away because you can't find these sausages anywhere else except Kennedy's.
As far as I know, everything's going, the factory and all.
Why is he closing?
Basically, lack of trade. Trade's not like it was, and that's a fact. Pity I wasn't here for another 10 years. I could retire then, couldn't I? But I'll find something to do, no doubt.
Have you got anything in mind?
Not really, to be honest. No. I really don't. Because I've never been out of work, you see. I've never been out of work at all, so I don't really know. After Christmas, I shall try and sort something out. It seems strange anyway.
There'll never be anything any better. I've tried a hell of a amount of different sausages and I haven't come up to one yet that touches Kennedy's, but we've got to move on, whether we like it or not, really.
Is this back on? Is this on? It's not on?
No, hello.
Yours is on.
Is it? Was the translation okay? Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay. Thank you guys in the translation.
So,
yeah.
oops. So maybe it would be interesting to know a little bit about why these films were made. Should I start with that or the method? So maybe we'll start with methodologies. The methodologies that basically these films came up with. We have an anthropological background, so the first most important thing is thinking about how people represent other people. So when you have a camera in your hand, you actually have the power to manipulate the image that you're getting from someone else. And we were inspired by our kind of anthropological learning of spending time with people before getting to the point of representing them. So as far as possible in our workshops, and certainly in this workshop, we wanted students to do research beyond logistical recceing, which you would do in any film anyway. We wanted them to spend time learning about the communities that they were going to be making films with. So over a course of 6 weeks, I think it was, we ran one-day workshops and then had a week-long shoot and edit. So the films that you saw were made over, in terms of the research, were made over several weeks. In terms of the actual filmmaking, 5 days.
So there was a lot, as well as sessions with us, there was a lot of going to meet the people they were making films with, getting to know them, finding out what they wanted to be in the films.
So the topics were choices of the young people themselves. We simply told them to go to somewhere in their area they didn't know anything about. The Anglesey Road film was made by a group of students who thought it was Black History Month at the time that we were making the film, and it was one Nigerian student, 2 Nigerian students, 1 Jamaican student, and a Nepali student, right, in that group. And they decided that they didn't know anything about the Somali community and that Somalia is never considered or represented within Black History Month in the UK. So what they wanted to do was to make a film about this street. And it was a street that none of them had ever been to before.
And more than that, the Somalian community has a very, very bad reputation in the UK. In all media, pretty much, every article or report is negative, and the students were interested to in some ways very bravely, because of all the negative publicity, to go and find out the truth, so to speak, or at least to talk to them and work with them.
Yeah, I suppose to find out for themselves where this stereotypical image had come from.
I think one thing that's interesting with our workshops often, and one thing we try and work through, is when we come up with the initial ideas session. I'm not sure whether it was true of these students, but in general, straight away people's pitches for film ideas are based on preconceptions. So I want to make a film about homeless people to show how terrible and depressed their life is. And one thing we always try and do, which is again rooted in anthropology, is take a step back and encourage them to get rid of those preconceptions, or at least be aware of them before they go and start talking to people, so that the questions they ask are open, that they're seeking to learn rather than project. Because, as I'm sure you all know, or we all know, a lot of, especially visual media, is someone landing on somewhere with a camera and telling the same story that's been told 1,000 times before, to feed audiences.
So Anglesey Road came about in that way, and so over the course of several weeks they spent time going to Anglesey Road, and they met with Mo, who was very much the guide through the road, and who introduced them to all these different people, and they made choices about what they wanted to include in the film and what they didn't want to include in the film, which we'll come on to later. But it was through that research that they made the decision to make the film that they made, which is a very positive representation. It's a very understanding representation. It's one that the Somali community came to see at the cinema and really enjoyed with the students. And so that was a really positive experience. The Good Old Days film.
I was just wondering whether we should go back to talking about how we started this.
Yeah, I was just going to explain.
Okay. She's the boss.
The Good Old Days film was slightly more complex of how we actually got to it, but it was a group of students who didn't really know what they wanted to make a film about, and I think they were the minorities within the class, in that they were the only kind of indigenous British kids within that class, and wanted to make a film about buskers initially, which is people who sing for money in the train station, and they told me they wanted to make a film about how they hadn't been able to get a real job, and I thought, okay, well, why don't you speak to some buskers first before making that assumption about what they've chosen in their lives, maybe. And somehow, in the course of when they were researching, they came across this butcher's and found out that it was closing down. And actually, the film itself represents how the new waves of immigration to the area have meant that something very traditionally British isn't going to exist anymore. And there is something very sad about that, but it's also a reality. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing, and it was very interesting for me personally, because actually I'm always the advocate of obviously kind of pro-immigration and multiculturalism, but there is also another side to that as well, and I thought it was very interesting that I was challenged in my perceptions in making that film. Okay, but anyway, as Ed rightly said, we should probably go back to the methodologies. We got to these films through this idea of representing others and this prolonged research period. There are a couple of other things that we always use when we're doing workshops. One in particular, the Bali ethnographic experiment, which is quite an unusual, complicated experiment, which Ed is going to tell us about.
It's an exercise that was developed by a couple of anthropologists based at London School of Economics. Essentially for newcomers to anthropology, or concepts behind anthropology, to make people reflect on the experience of going into a culture completely foreign to them. So at the start of this and some of our other workshops, it's a really useful exercise to implement. And I don't know, for those of you who do this sort of thing, it might be one you could try and interpret for your setups. What it involves is you split your group into two, and you take them into separate rooms, and you give them a briefing basically as to what their culture is and the rules of that culture. So you might, I can't remember the names, but in one room you might have the Ling culture, and they can't say no. When they speak to someone, they have to have their eyes towards the floor, and they use playing cards as currency. And then in the other room you have another culture with completely different rules. They have to have music on to move and that sort of thing. So it's quite a funny exercise. But what you then do is send scouts or anthropologists in from one culture to the other culture. So they go into the other room and have to learn the rules of that culture without them being explained sort of literally. They have to come back, write down their findings, and also reflect on the experience of being in this very foreign environment. Whenever I talk about anthropology, I always do this a lot. Anyway, so we start with that, and it's a fun, I don't know if it's something you could use, but it's a very fun way of getting people to think about some of these issues and to really reflect on those preconceptions you might have, because inevitably when they first go into the other room they think, oh, what a bunch of weird behaviour, you're all mad. But then they realise what they're doing in their room and how quickly they've become assimilated to the rules of their made-up culture. So we start with that.
So straight away, an exercise like that makes you kind of reflect on how you project your own assumptions onto anything else that you see, and how you speak about it and how you take it back and talk about it to other people, and you become very conscious of the fact that you actually maybe don't know all of the social codes, and you might not be completely qualified, and so it does really make you reflect on that.
And then we run a series of sort of detailed sessions, watching and talking about lots of different styles of filmmaking, mainly factual, sort of documentary films. But what can tend to happen is that students come with a preconception that documentary equals boring white man talking to camera, and that's it. You can't be more creative. And they also come with an idea of a very literary or academic idea of how you might present a topic. So if you wanted to investigate multiculturalism in London, the initial idea might always be to go and just do a more sociological survey where you go, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? To a variety of people, so you have vox pops. Whereas we encourage them to think more ethnographically and bottom up, allow people to tell their stories, to explore some of these issues through character.
And then a key part of this workshop, and I think all the workshops that we've run, are partnerships. And I think if you're thinking about setting up projects, it's really key to think about partnerships and who you work with, because there's real strength in sharing knowledge, but also in recognising that maybe there's one organisation that works with a group of people you're very interested to run a project with, and it would be great to involve them in the process. And by doing that, you gain a wealth of experience of theirs, and they also can they can help guide you around what you need to develop, how you need to pitch your workshop to better suit the conditions that you're going to be working in, for example. So in this workshop, the strongest, we had the Anthropological Institute, but also the college itself. And within it, we worked with the main teacher of these students. And she was completely instrumental in making this a really successful project.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the translation.
Oh, okay.
Because she provided the ongoing link between the weeks, between the workshops. She knew the young people and was able to, instill in them the trust to trust themselves to explore ideas that might be challenging. And she was really able to contain the project and to make sure that it was constant in their minds, despite the fact that it was spread over quite a long time, where we were only there one day a week at the beginning.
And it's sort of hard to overstate how vital it is to have these partnerships and this support, we think, because we come in as filmmakers or facilitators, and the projects are so much better run if you have someone on the ground in an institution helping you out with all this stuff. Also, to be frank, some of the administration stuff that, well, I'm not as good at anyway.
Well, I mean, from the other side of things, the project that I'll speak about this afternoon, participatory photography with young refugees, as someone who's worked with young refugees since 2006, when I see projects being run, I'm very, very critical about the measures that have been put in place, because it's working in a context that I know so much about. And I feel that if you're going in, the very least you can do is get some advice or talk to or learn from someone who spent that amount of time working with a group of people you're interested in working with. So it comes from that as well. So the key question. So the key question that.
Start with the question.
Is there a question?
Yeah.
Just about question. I want to, before to go parte and in explanation, I would like to ask you.
Oh, sorry.
No, but I think if I will speak, they will translate. Ma possono tradurre. Okay. I would like to ask one question about first video, and second one about second. About first one, I noticed that all the imaging recorded was very, very fast and on the people. I don't know if in the discussion in workshop I mean, probably what I'm noticing is quite stupid, but I want to ask anyway. It is like that it was not visible, the environment there. Is it intentionally or not? And second question about second video, was there some follow-up from that research? Because I mean, I will talk about, I was dealing with economic research and global value chain that are changing the structure of little retailers and seller. So I would like to ask, there was some research, like official research, about what is happening with little retailers in London or in England in general, now that big chain in food and distribution and in all the other sectors, distribution, are taking their place. Thank you.
Okay. If you like.
Good questions. Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. It's not a stupid question on the first film, especially being a lot of people. I would say that that was partly because we always leave it as much as possible up to the students to make the films that they want to make, and because they were doing it. Is this on? Yeah, because they were doing it with this guy Mo guiding them around. I think it sort of lent itself to being more person heavy. Having said that, I also think it was a learning experience for us. This was the first workshop we ran, and I think now we're probably better, and we're going to show one other film, we're probably better at covering the visually evoking side of things before they go out and film. So there's a lot wider variety now in the films that are made as part of our workshops, where there's a combination of sort of more sensorial, atmospheric visual stuff to create a sense of place and sound. And I think, so that was probably one of the learnings we had from that project as well, I would say.
Yeah,
Anything
definitely.
else?
No, I'd agree. We've got another video just a bit later that you'll see about the young people talking about the film that they made and the choices that they made as well. So I think their way of talking about it covers a little bit of why they chose to film it. It is quite fast-paced, and I think it's also because that's the pace that young people are used to seeing things in. So in a way, that's almost like slowed down compared to what they really wanted to do. In terms of your second question, the butchers did close down, but we haven't made a follow-up film. Though what I can say about that area and the changes in that area, if it might be of interest to you. So the teacher on this, the woman who is the teacher on this course has actually left the school and now works with us. And she also worked on a series for the BBC around streets in the UK and how they've changed over the years. That's a very kind of broad summary, but she does focus, they do focus on this, on the street where the butchers is specifically. And that episode is really interesting in terms of these changes and economic changes in particular. And so maybe I can write down the link of that if that's interesting for you. But it's definitely a big question mark in London, and London is being bulldozed by big commercial monsters, and anything small and unique or identity is being lost, definitely.
I think also on the second question, the woman who was the teacher came over
we can call her Jamie. That's
Jamie came over to the dark side and became a filmmaker. And I suspect if she had carried on being a teacher at that college, we would have formed a really good partnership with them and done an ongoing series of workshops around that area. In fact, I mean, that was probably, it was a long time ago, but I think within our aim then. But we're definitely now trying to aim towards, we find more productive to have institutional partnerships. So I think we'll talk about it a bit later, but we've been doing quite a embedded project in the east of England where we continually go back to the same area to try and create these partnerships and an awareness that there's this process going on of local collaboration.
Okay, so within this idea of representing others, I think the next, maybe we can listen to what the students had to say on making of.
This is a lot of talking, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so...
but this is basically interviews. Again, ideally we would do this with every project because we think it's a useful exercise for the students to go through. This is a behind the scenes, well, not really behind the scenes, it's more reflections from the students on the process. And it's useful for lots of reasons. Not only because they get a chance to record and obviously have an audience for what the learning experience they went through, but also actually they're being filmed, which we try and make sure happens throughout the process. We didn't mention that. So from the barley experiment thing through to when they're presenting their ideas, through to this film where they're giving their reflections on the process, we make sure they film each other a lot as well, because we think that's very important. It's important for them to realise what it means to have a camera in your face, essentially.
Oops. Oh.
It's about butchers, or the butchers in Deptford, and about it closing down.
It's called Kennedy's, and it's 130 years old. So we was kind of having a look at English tradition and how it's changing in our modern society.
And then it became more about Bill himself rather than the whole butchers, and more about how he hasn't got a job anymore.
Our project is about the Somalian community on Anglesey Road.
Seen as it's Black History Month, they're not really an iconic country when it comes to the celebration, isn't it?
It's taking us on a tour through the street, all the different shops that have different facilities and stuff like that.
That the sense of community, this place really holds a sense of unity and respect to the elders and to the youngers, and a strong sense of culture as well.
Our project is it's about village markets.
And we found out that there's bits of the traders' stories and stuff like that.
Now we've got Isham,
Africans, India.
How people ended up there, and you know what they were doing before they ended up there, and yeah, and the history about it as well.
It's kind of great just talking to them and just hearing what they have to say.
When I first started, first meeting, I was like, there's no way I can get a 5-minute documentary.
When I first took the course, I mean, JB said it was 5 minutes. I mean, what? Just 5 minutes? I mean, now I'm ooh, 5 minutes is stuff. Yeah.
I've learned about ethnographic films, yeah, and how they're different from just normal films.
You try and understand the people and you want to learn about them.
With anthropology, you're really going in there to find out what they want to say about their culture.
You do become very involved and in touch with whoever you're studying, and yeah, it's just looking at humanity from a different angle.
Even though we've just been here for 2 days, we've learned a lot more insight into the actual what you do and everything like that.
I've learned new things. I've learned how to use the camera. I've learned how to interview people.
But videoing is all about. Do you know what I mean? The way they were going to cut things, and I didn't know anything about that.
When we were doing camera work, it's when we were moving. Don't move too fast, because although you think you're going slow, you're actually going really fast. The group work I found the most challenging, because everybody wants to do the main bits, which is being the cameraman or the editing and whatever. But our group, I think, has got on really well, and we've pulled it off.
You kind of have to now sit down and go over the footage and then kind of come to some conclusion about what the culture's about and stuff. So it's kind of interesting, it's kind of exciting, a little journey and stuff.
It's getting great, we're just editing now, our interviews.
But the editing was quite challenging as well, because it does take a long time to do, and there's a lot of little things you have to do to get it just right.
All of us kind of have different views, so it's really nice for one person to do it all, but that one person needs a lot of help from others.
And we just put music on, and it's really depressing at the end.
But it fits really well with what we filmed.
I really enjoyed it. It's been a really new experience for me. It's totally new.
I've learnt to get on with other people in a group and teamwork.
It's really fun. I really enjoyed it.
So you have to really get along with people and really take a step back and just think together as a group.
I think the whole thing is quite fun, because I've got to know people, I've got to know how to talk to people.
Just working with the anthropologists and stuff, and just the whole social interaction and stuff, and the whole different ethnic groups working together with as well. And the whole group dynamics from the beginning to the end was genuinely kind of cool.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been a new learning experience, and I think it'll help me in the future with certain things.
I didn't really know anything about anthropology in the beginning, but I've become quite interested in it, and I was looking at the courses that they do at university now.
And it's brilliant, yeah. Ching ching.
So, obviously, that is not sort of a work of cinematic genius or anything. And it's quite simple, a lot of the things that people were saying. But I guess there are two things that I would say about it. Is one, that even though it is quite simple, the discussion that prompted afterwards when we screened it, together with the films and the filmmakers and some of the people who were in the films, was really great. And it was a springing board for a really productive debate around visual literacy, and I think there's still a lot of people who were in the audience when we screened that film who didn't really get what went into making a film. They think you just turn up with a camera and it appears. So having a little device like that we've also found to be really useful, just from the point of view of sparking discussion. And the other thing to say from a more logistical or financial point of view is that material like that is crucial for further funding and for institutions to show off, as you know. I mean, that was a key part of us getting the funding bid, because they could show afterwards that these young people had learnt something, and they had progressed in their knowledge in some way. So not the best film ever, but it serves a purpose and is very useful for lots of different things.
Yeah, and I think basically the whole idea around visual literacy and thinking about film as a construct is really, it's kind of key to the way that we want to teach. I think the process of teaching and facilitating films is very important because it informs how people think about how they are then represented in films. Particularly young people, we often work with young people, and they have very bad press in the UK. So you'll see, particularly, we ran a series of workshops with the BFI a couple of years later, and in South London, where the majority of the workshops were young black men, and they constantly represented by the media in a very negative light. So that, by going through the motions of how a film was made, they came up with the idea that they actually wanted to make films about themselves and to really challenge these the perceptions or the way that they are represented in the media. So this slide by, I don't know whether you know Kapuscinski, the Polish journalist or writer, it depends where you sit. But the last book that he wrote before he passed away was called The Other. The other is very much an anthropological concept. Constantly, the anthropologist is constantly concerned with representing the other. And in this book, Kapuscinski talks about how today all inhabitants of this planet are others meeting others, meaning that there isn't any more one anthropologist that's going to find out about another group of people or about another person. Every individual person is potentially that person finding out about another person. And because everybody has the ability to make a film or to represent someone else, everybody is in that position where they're making assumptions and projecting images of other people. So it's not, so thoughts and considerations that might have been confined to anthropologists maybe, or filmmakers, are now actually much broader, and a concern that people in a much broader sphere should be thinking about. In relation to that, it's interesting to reflect again on Anglesey Road. Do you want to talk about the cats and the...
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, another thing about the film workshops, we think, is that they should be seen as an opportunity for this others meeting others. There's a much wider opportunity for all sorts of people to create debates and to make and reflections and films about others. A key part of this initial workshop was a screening at the local cinema that we organised, and we try and do this again with every project, where community members and the filmmakers are invited to come and watch the films, and obviously have a question and answer session afterwards. And the feedback on the Anglesey Road film was especially interesting. It was quite moving, actually, how the Somali community responded to it being shown. As I mentioned earlier, almost always they're referred to in negative terms in the press, and this generated not only the screening and the fact that it's online, obviously with their permission, but also it generated local media coverage, which in some small way didn't change the world, but in some small way contributed to greater community cohesion and understanding. It was criticised, interestingly, the film was criticised later at different forums for being too positive and for not being a credible depiction of the Somalis, because it didn't show things like violence that does occur within their community, and it didn't show the men chewing cut. You know, do you know cut? The thing they chew.
So cat is a kind of, it's a kind of it's a leaf. It's basically like a drug, but it's legal in the UK, strangely, and it's a recreational drug, but it's also a social thing, and it's something that Somali community, but also say Yemeni or Ethiopian community is consumed within those communities, and is taken to be a very negative thing. I suppose the image around cat is of laziness and apathy and not working and not doing anything. So this combined with violence was the dominant image of the Somali community, and the students were criticised for choosing not to show this in the film.
Well, actually, they were criticised for not showing it, and then another useful element of the discussion was that it transpired that the students had made a proactive decision not to include it in the film, following conversations with the community about the whys and the wherefores of putting it on film. They felt that they could do other things that would show a different side of the community. The sort of interesting counterpoint to this film being shown is that a few weeks later, a very famous British TV journalist who's half Somalian, half British, went and made a BBC report on the same street, where he focused on all the old stereotypes about gang crime and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and what that meant was that it sort of highlighted the trust that had been built up by our filmmakers and the process they went through in terms of going to visit the community a lot, and they had essentially got access for the BBC to make this subsequent report, which was incredibly negative. Well, then another person we know tried to go and film a few weeks later on a more participative project, and he wasn't allowed. He was thrown off. So it was an interesting insight into, actually, even though it is very localized and it is small scale, the kind of importance of these processes to local people and the people who are involved. And as far as I know, that's still the case. It's quite difficult to film because that trust has been lost again.
In terms of the students, what was particularly interesting for them is that they actually saw this media machine in process. So the street that they'd spent so much time on and people that they had spoken to were framed completely differently to how they had seen them and how they had chosen to frame them in a different film. And it was really like seeing two completely different portraits next to each other, and how you can manipulate or choose to make films in different ways. And cue our next favourite slide, which is a quote from a fantastic editor who passed away last year, but he edited a lot of anthropological films, and he's written a fantastic book of essays about editing. And this is one of our favourite quotes, because he really sums up what it is to make a film, and it's about to shape the things that you have filmed. Basically, you make something means something, you give it a narrative, you give it a storyline, whereas reality just plays out. It doesn't necessarily follow any storyline.
Okay, do you think we should just talk about some of the other stuff we do? How's everyone feeling?
Yeah,
do people smoke? Do people need water?
Or coffees? You need nicotine? Should we take a... Okay. I said 5, you said 10, so let's...
Very strict.
Okay.
Oh.
10-minute break? Should we take a 10-minute break?
Enough. 10 minuti.
Okay, cool.
We took it into, and it was everywhere in the press in Spain.
Okay, cool. Thanks for taking a 10-minute, 15-minute break. That was really impressive. So we probably go on for just around an hour. We'll try and make it less than an hour, and then we'll break for lunch for an hour. So we'll start by wrapping up really around the thoughts that we introduced this morning, around participatory work and what's important in it, what's its legacy, is it the process, is it the product, and some thoughts around that. Okay, no, not this.
So just
we skip those. Okay.
As an example from that project that you just watched, is this okay as a speed for the translators? Yeah, can't tell. What sort of things do we try and bear in mind to make sure that the projects are sustainable and that they're not just people coming to play with a camera for 5 days? This particular project was obviously supported by the Royal Anthropological Institute and also formed part of the students' studies at school. So it was quite embedded in a lot of ways with their academic experience and meant that they could get a lot more out of the process than just a 5-minute film on a DVD. And it's always not just a matter of hard skills that we try and impart to students, and we make that very clear when we start. So whilst they may learn how to use some of the buttons on a camera and that sort of thing, the soft skills are just as important. So the Nepali student who made the Anglesey Road film with some of the others was recently arrived in the UK, and the teacher who later joined us did quite an in-depth feedback session on what the process had meant to him and the experience of working in a team, having to do things that by definition involved collaboration, communication outside the classroom, meant that for him it was a really important experience in terms of integrating into his life in that part of London. There were also more obvious academic results out of it. 3 of the students went on to study anthropology at university. 2 of those 3 were the ones at the end of the film who had not known about anthropology before and found that it was something they wanted to learn more about and study because of its approach to life, the world, and everything. Some of these students didn't have family members that had been to university, so it was interesting how a small experience like this could broaden into much wider results.
This is direct. This is direct feedback from the teacher who is teaching with us, and I thought maybe it'd just be nice to read what she said. So the majority of these students didn't have any family members who are the majority of these students didn't have family members who are higher education educated. They also didn't know what anthropology was, and despite multicultural demographic of the college and local area, there were clear social divisions and surprising lack of knowledge about other cultures. For example, some would laugh or raise an eyebrow at each other's food or accents. So, and like Jay and Oti explained, so 2 of the young people in the feedback film, they didn't go down Anglesey Road because they felt threatened or real outsiders to the area. So that was just direct feedback from the teacher, highlighting what Ed has been talking about. Did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, so basically what then happened is because of these outcomes, both for the students and for what it had meant to some of the community members, we decided that it was a model that seemed to work, and since then have gone on to create lots of other projects and partnerships.
Okay.
But you're going to talk about planning, right?
So we're going to talk a little bit about planning and setting up projects. I think the most obvious questions when you're thinking about a project are the ones you'd ask when you're actually making a film or in the process of creating something. Who, what, where, when, how, but also, really importantly, why? I think the why is always the question mark, really, when you're representing a situation or a group of people or a place. It's to know what your key motivation is at the end of the day. What do you want to learn? And it's important to always think about learning first and always, really, rather than just saying or telling. So knowing that you're also part of a process of creating something. And so that's why we call what we do facilitation as well. It's not teaching necessarily, it's not telling people how to do things, but it's giving the tools so that people can do things in the way that they want sometimes. It's about giving the structures that will enable people to say what they want to say or to represent themselves as much as possible. So representation is always a key question. It's probably the word that I say the most. Another project that we ran, over a number of years, was in partnership with a Bengali girls' school in the same borough, not in the same borough, in Tower Hamlets. So one of the areas that I showed you on the map, the one with the front line. So that map, the school is actually next to the front line. So this school where we worked for several years with 99% Muslim Bengali girls' school, mostly Ed and I teaching. So we took the same model to this school, and we spent weeks developing ideas with students, and they chose to make different films. One group looked at different types of hijab, because many of the girls in the school wore hijab. Some looked at the ideas of traditional, the places that women in their community occupied, so traditional housewives versus working mother. And some of them, what was the other film? And there was a third film made about, I think it was a young girl who wanted to do sport which isn't usually thought of as a sport that girls should do, like self-defense, a type of self-defense. So these were the ideas that they came up with, and they made short films around these ideas. It was a much shorter workshop. So after this workshop had taken place, a couple of weeks later I was giving a talk at the British Museum around film that I'd just finished making, and it was a film that had nothing to do with any of these things, and a group of girls from that school came to the screening. And at the end of the screening they came up to me and they said, "Oh wow, this is amazing, we'd never thought that you can make films about other things." So I thought this was really interesting, because what they were saying was essentially that they didn't realize that they could make films not about themselves or not about their realities. And what I realized had probably happened is that in teaching them, we had given them the idea that they should model the films that they make on themselves and represent their own experiences, and that they made films that represented our projections of their lives. So this idea of othering is again a very anthropological thing, but how this comes about is very interesting to reflect on when you're working with groups of people and giving them the tools to represent themselves. And we thought a lot about this and questioned how we'd managed to, in thinking that we were being so open and giving them tools to do things, actually facilitated films where we hadn't really enabled them to make what they really wanted to make, if that makes sense. So it's really the lines between these things. Like, are you influencing? Are you teaching? Are you facilitating? We teach, for example, in Georgia, and I think I've been there 3 times in the past year. And it's always a question mark when you're working with a different visual culture over how do you facilitate a film. You don't want to say, no, this is a wrong way of filming, because maybe that's part of someone else's visual culture, and you might not understand things in the same way. And so it's just a line to think about. Within this question mark, I'll show you the film that we thought was the best suited for, well, one of the films that we what format is this? One of the films that we showed in the school, in the girls' school. Oh. One of the films that we showed in the girls' school, which we thought was fantastic and is a fantastic film, was probably the reason why they then came to make films only about themselves, despite the fact that that's probably not what they really wanted to make films about, if that makes sense. But I thought you should see it, because it is a great film, but why is it that we associated this film with these girls? So I don't think it's working.
We could go online and get it.
Can we put the...
Just have the lighter set.
Wait, let me do it. Sorry, there was meant to be an image. Let me see. Don't look, because this is actually giving away how great the film is. There you go. There's no talking in this. So this was one of the main films that we showed during this workshop, and I think it's a fantastic film. It's really simple. It's really, you know, it's a great portrait. What's interesting though is that it wasn't anything new to the girls in the school. That was them, and it wasn't as interesting to them as it was to us. So the fact that we chose this film to show them was probably a lack of imagination on our part, but it meant that they then decided to make films that were maybe similar to this. Whereas if they'd had more of a choice, or if maybe we'd shown them something completely different, they would have felt maybe the confidence or the possibility or just the permission to make whatever they wanted. So that's just something to take into consideration. You know, it's nothing bad to do with the film. I think the film's fantastic. It's just being conscious that the things that you show and the things that you say and the directions that you give really impact and influence, particularly when you're teaching something for the first time. So when you're teaching film for the very first time and you're teaching how to manage a camera, you're also imparting on how, you know, how you probably make films. And it's being aware of this, and how to counter that is probably to show other examples, you know, to really use diversity within the examples you give. Do you have any? No? Okay, so with that in mind, God, it goes back to the beginning every time. With that in mind, we're going to look at some practical considerations. So I think this is just several some considerations. There are always going to be lots of considerations. A lot of the time, these question marks, I think, are the most important, and particularly a lot of you have referenced wanting to work with socially marginalized individuals or different groups of people that you might work with and you might know or you might be interested in, and there are several, well, it's always important to take, I think, practical considerations, also ethical and logistical considerations into account as you're designing the project, so that it's one that's really been thought through. So around age, age is quite, well, it's quite broad, basically. If you're working with children, there are very clear guidelines around how to work with children. In the UK, we have a child protection, we've got child protection best practice guidelines, and I'm sure you have something similar here in Italy. Those rules are basically to safeguard the best interests of the child in context, so that you're always thinking about how a child is going to benefit and what the impact of a piece of work on that child is going to be. It also involves being in touch with the responsible adult who is responsible for that child. So it might be a parent, it might be a guardian, it might be a social worker, but there will always be a responsible adult who represents that child. Actually, there isn't always a responsible adult. In the case of working with young refugees who are separated from their families in the UK, they might have a social worker, for example, but they might be completely alone, and perhaps they might be what the state considers illegal, or they might just not have anyone who they can relate to in an adult position, and in working with them, you would be one of the only people who is an adult in their life. So age is quite important in terms of thinking about how when you set up a project, particularly working with children, minors, anyone under the age of 18, thinking about who is legally responsible for the child and that you're always working in the child's best interests. Best interests is one thing, but you might also be working with, for example, teenagers. So teenagers are under 18, so their parents are still their legal guardians and responsible for them. If you want to take their picture or have their face in a film, it's still their parents who need to sign their consent. But they feel very much adult because they're teenagers, they know what they think, or they think they know what they think, they might know what they think. And so that's also a tricky, it's like a boundary to think about and to think about how you manage it. It might be, if you're working with adults, for example, you might need to consider, okay, if you're facilitating a group of adults where they're much older than you are, you might need to think about that and how you present your work or present yourself. If you're working with a group of older people, you might again need to think about how you approach the project, or do you, if it's, for example, much older people, how do you make it accessible, or how do you make it comfortable? And again, I think these things can be, it's very helpful with these things to speak to the organizations who already work with the people you will be working with, to find out from them how is the best way to approach these matters. For example, I spend a lot of time with my grandmother and notice that a lot of people who come to speak to her suddenly speak very, very loud and very, very slowly, but she can actually hear and understand everything. So that's not a very enjoyable experience for her. It would just be, you know, but it's meant in a good way, but it's not the most positive, you know, she doesn't get the most positive feeling from it. And so these are just things to take into consideration. It doesn't come from a bad place, but you just need to think about it. Risk factors. This sounds like a list of negatives. It's not. It's just things to think about. Risk factors, it's important to think about the risk factors. They might not be huge risks, or you might not think they represent huge risks at the outset, but it's worth thinking through what they might be. So we do, particularly when you work with young people, generally if you're going to engage in any sort of creative project or any sort of outing, you do what is called a risk assessment. So you assess what the possible risk could be, and it could be something that might appear not so important, but so you assess the risk, you assess the severity, so how severe it would be if this happened. You assess the likelihood, is it likely to happen, is it not likely to happen? And from the combination of those two, you assess the overall risk, low, medium, high, generally. And then you also assess what your response would be if this happened. So my examples, which are not very inventive, but if you're filming on a farm with a group of 12 to 15-year-olds, so the risk would be young person is bitten by an animal. The severity of this, medium, I mean, it could be nothing, it could be terrible, you don't know. Likelihood, kind of low. I mean, you're on a farm, so the animals there aren't very dangerous. It should be okay. The overall risk is quite low, but you still have a plan in case something happens. So you have someone who's responsible for first aid on your team. You know where the closest hospital is. You speak to the young people when you get to the farm and you talk to them about the fact that these are animals and don't put your hands in their mouth. So you've got a plan around that risk. Another risk might be a young person having an allergic reaction. Actually, something like that is much more likely. So the severity of something like that could be really bad, but let's say it's medium. The likelihood is medium to high. If you're going out into natural environment, actually it's quite likely that someone's allergic to something in a big group of kids. So the overall risk is medium, but what you do is you you have a response ready. So you have medical files or some knowledge, or have checked with people who are responsible for the children or with the children themselves if they have any allergies. And particularly things like hay fever or allergy to specific plants. Do they have tablets with them, as you can often carry? Do you know where the closest hospital is? Do you have up-to-date contact information for parents, legal guardians, people responsible for the children? So this is quite a random example, but in putting together a risk assessment, you might think about all the different things that can happen within a project. If you're running a project, say, overseas, in a different country, you might need to think through risk assessments in a similar way. So, for instance, where I've produced films where a filmmaker has gone to an area under heavy military occupation, and it wouldn't have been seen favourably that he was filming there. So the risk assessment on something like that is quite detailed, and the response to risk is very detailed, and you know, the most important thing is contact points and contact people, and you know, frequency of contact, if that makes sense. It's just things to bear in mind, and the most important thing with risk is if you think through what the possible responses would be, you're one step ahead of anything sudden or unexpected happening. You can respond to the situation. So going back to the list, security again, do you need to take any measures to minimize, or where are you filming? What do you need to think about? First aid, it's just quite useful. Somehow when you take a group of people or you start filming, you just never quite know what can happen. You're out, and you're engaging with people's emotions and feelings, and you're asking people both on camera and behind the camera to engage in a creative space, which might be something quite personal, and somehow that seems like the kind of area where things could develop or go wrong, in a sense. On a less kind of extreme note, maybe, group cohesion is something to really think about, and think about how you work it out or work with it. So if you're running a project with a group of, say, 12-year-olds, and you have to assign teams, or if you let them assign their own teams, how do you then balance out practical experience, or how do you balance out personality clashes, or how do you manage any kind of clash, or how do you, you know, on a completely different, I once had to, we were facilitating a group in Norwich, and the group that I was working with, 2 people didn't come to the practical filmmaking day, so actually the 2 filmmakers were a couple, and one of them knew how to film really well and the other didn't. So at the same time as filming, they were actually playing out this very odd relationship battle at the same time, and it was really stressful to facilitate, because it was stuff not related to the film and not related to who they were filming that was actually taking forefront of the filming process. Things like this can happen when you put people in groups together and ask them to work together. So just think about it, and think about your role in managing that, and you know, trying to mediate as well. Working with minors, so I covered this a bit in age, but so working with minors or working with vulnerable young people or adults, it's again the same kind of questions to bear in mind, and also to think about whether you're making yourself understood and clear, whether you're accessible enough as a facilitator so people feel that they can ask questions of you as well. And this applies both for the people who are behind the camera and for the people in front of the camera, so that you're never objectifying, I suppose. And this isn't necessarily always an easy thing to do. I think, like the example with the Mulberry Girls' School that we showed, you know, I think what was happening there is that we projected an image onto them. It wasn't a bad thing, but it did impact on the films that they made, and so it's just being aware. Consent is a similar question to think about. Have you got consent of all the people in the film that you'll be filming with? Have you got consent of all the people making the films as well? And have you got the consent from the right people? So you might have consent from a 15-year-old who wants to be part of a project or who agrees to be in a project, but legally, actually, you need consent from their parents. It depends where you position the importance of that consent. It depends what's being filmed. It depends what the subject is. But you never know what's going to come out in a film. You never know, and so it's important to think about it.
And just on that, I think consent is something we feel quite strongly about with all our projects, in the sense that it should be informed consent. It's vital that the people that are being filmed understand where and how their image could be used. It's not enough just to say, is it okay for us to make this film? It's really important that you explain where it can go. Is that okay? Will it be on the internet? Will it be on TV? Unlikely with our projects, but all that sort of thing. And you measure these things off in writing and explain it to them and say, this is where it could go. Will that impact on you? Because we've had films made about asylum seekers. We've had films made with disabled people. And it's quite important that they understand where their film's going to end up.
And I think it's particularly important nowadays with the internet. When we started out in 2007, it wasn't, you know, a film that you made wasn't necessarily immediately available to anyone in the world who just has the ability to Google something. But now it is. And, you know, people can share your films, which can be a great thing, but can be a very difficult thing. Because if you ever want to take it down, then you really have to chase so many different leads and find out so many different things. So it's just this awareness, and ideally consent should be written. Boundaries is quite a tricky question mark, and I think we'll go into it more in depth on the specific projects that I'll talk about this afternoon. But I think it's particularly relevant when working with particularly socially marginalised groups or individuals, and it's knowing where you stand and why you're doing something. I feel really strongly about this. I think it's really key. Having worked in a community centre, being connected to a community centre for a number of years, you know, I think you really need to question or think about, reflect on your motivation and why you're doing something, and what's the limit of your practice, I guess. So, for instance, I've worked with the same group of young people for the past 7 years. I'm one of the only adults they know in the UK. The limit is that I will only see them in a professional context. They're not my friends, they're not part of my family, and I need to be really clear about that, because actually if I start to blur that boundary, I'm actually doing them and myself more bad than good. So things can slowly slip, I suppose, with something like that. If a young person has your number, then you're opening up a door and accessibility that maybe you can't honor. So, for example, you might get a message that's inappropriate. You might send something that's inappropriate. You might get a phone call from someone in a very dire situation. There could be a good side to that. Maybe you're someone's lifeline, but can you answer that call? Can you actually respond to it practically? It's a question mark. Do you become friends with young people that you work with on Facebook? Is that appropriate? Should you be knowing about their lives outside of the context that you work with them professionally? Should they be knowing about your lives outside of the context professionally? It doesn't mean you can't be close. It doesn't mean you can't be kind of human and engage with each other. It's just being clear about what that relationship represents. Particularly working with vulnerable people or vulnerable young people, where you might be one of the only people who listens, or one of the only people who has a continuous, constant relationship. And I think determining the boundary determining these boundaries for yourself is really important, and it's important that your boundaries are consistent. Consistency is much more important than telling someone you can help them, because with that being an empty promise, if that makes sense. So I think boundaries are actually the most difficult things to get right. Having a clear boundaried relationship also means that you're more likely to invest in a relationship long term, because you do it in a more sustainable way. So you might start working with a group of people and think, they're amazing, and you really learn so much from them, but actually the next project comes along and you forget all about them. That's not very helpful to that group of people. So it's much better to have a clear boundary of what you represent and what you do, and to be so that you always can be, so you have a consistency. Basically, a consistent relationship is much better than having a relationship of false promises. Is that clear?
I don't know.
Is that clear?
It's quite difficult to put in practice boundaries, because at some point you have to be close enough to get them open to you. And
Do you want it?
I agree. I think boundaries is really tricky, but I think it's, I don't think there's a right answer and a wrong answer. I just think that you have to think about it, and think about it really honestly with yourself. Think about it in time, like in a length of time, and think about what you actually commit to something or somewhere or someone. And think about how to make it work in time as well. So projects aren't just thought about as a one-off. So, for example, as facilitators, we run projects every year with any number of people, and we want to stay in touch with all of those people. How do we manage that? How can we be available to every single person we've made a film with? It's a question mark. So for us, we're a collective. We have a collective identity. We do, for example, have a Facebook page, and that's a good way of staying in touch with students. It's not within our personal lives, it's within our collective identity, so it's our professional life. With, for example, the community centre I mentioned, I've been connected to that place since 2006. So there are children there that I've known since they were 11 years old, and who are now, 18, 19. Of course, they're hugely important to me, and I know that I'm very important to them. So I don't see them outside the centre, but I go to that centre every single week. And they know me in the context of an establishment, and that's safer for them and it's safer for me. So they'll always know where to find me, like every week in this place. and I'll always know where to find them. And, you know, if I'm worried, for example, I can call up from the centre. But it's that kind of boundary that's thought through, and it's not always an easy journey to get there, if it makes sense. But very important, particularly working with vulnerable people, vulnerable young people. It's a bit like when you learn about first aid, and the first rule of first aid is that you check that you're safe yourself, and then you see what you can do about someone else's situation. I think this is very similar. Boundaries are really important for both sides, because in putting ourselves out there in a project, we're not always thinking about ourselves in necessarily a very objective way, and so it's important to check that you're clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and that will make for a better project overall. But of course it's very complicated, but it's something to think through. So, and then the last point on this is sustainable projects. The idea of projects having a future or a life beyond the process or the week or the month that you're filming or making something together. How do you chart that project in time? Do you give it a life? So do you give it, say, a website or something to kind of keep it going? Do you make it a more long-term thing, like a project that we'll show you just now? And then how do you maintain those relationships in a realistic way? How do you make it realistic that you check in with people just to see where they're at now or how they're doing now? How do you balance that relationship? So lots of food for thought before lunch.
Yeah, I wonder whether...
Should show the Norwich. Oh.
Well, how is everyone doing? Say that again.
You're thinking of lunch?
Hands up for pranzo.
Is that people who want lunch?
Posso vedere. Pranzo?
Is that it? Oh, we keep talking then. No, we won't.
Yeah. Ok. Facciamo pranzo adesso?
Penso che alle 2:10 forse è una questione anche pratica.
Ok. Sì. Sì.
Yeah?
Sì. Una piccola città.
Okay, it's a practical matter on that. So. Okay, let's break for lunch, fine.
Any recommendations? Tipico di Bari per mangiare? Focaccia.
Okay, so shall we say we come back here for
3
o'clock? Yeah, it's good?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
Nearby there are a lot of places.
Okay.
Yeah?
With focaccia?
Okay.
Con focaccia?
We will take care of it.
It's good? Okay. Okay, we'll be back at 3 o'clock. Oh dear.